The Earth has existed for over 4.5 billion years. In that unfathomable stretch of time, billions of species have risen, thrived, and vanished. Some disappeared in sudden catastrophic events, others faded slowly, losing their grip on survival one generation at a time, and some were driven into oblivion by the very species now telling their story, us. What you are about to hear is a collection of 100 astonishing facts about animals that no longer walk, swim, fly, or crawl on this planet. These are stories of creatures so bizarre, so magnificent, and so heartbreakingly lost that you may never look at the natural world the same way again. Some of these facts will challenge what you thought you knew. Others will leave you stunned, and a few may haunt you long after this documentary is over. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this history video and what time you are watching it. And be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos. Now let us begin. Imagine standing on a shoreline 66 million years ago. The air is warm, thick, and humid. Towering ferns sway in a breeze that carries the scent of salt and vegetation. And then you hear it, a sound unlike anything that exists in the modern world. A deep, resonant bellow that vibrates through your chest. You turn, and there, stepping through the tree line, is a Tyrannosaurus rex. This is the creature that has captivated human imagination for over a century. But here is something that most people never consider. The Tyrannosaurus rex, that fearsome apex predator, had a bite force estimated at over 12,800 pounds. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the equivalent of the weight of a full-grown elephant pressing down through its jaws. No land animal alive today comes anywhere close to that level of crushing power. A modern saltwater crocodile, often cited as having the strongest bite in the animal kingdom today, generates roughly 3,700 pounds of force. The T-Rex exceeded that by nearly 4 times. Its teeth were not designed to slice like a knife. They were designed to pulverize. They could crush bone, and paleontologists have found fossilized T-Rex droppings, called coprolites, filled with fragments of shattered bone. This animal did not just eat meat, it consumed entire skeletons. But here is the part that surprises even seasoned paleontologists. Despite all of that raw power, the Tyrannosaurus rex had arms so small that they could not even reach its own mouth. Each arm was roughly 3 feet long on a body that could stretch over 40 feet. For decades, scientists debated whether those tiny arms had any function at all. Some researchers suggested they may have been used for gripping during mating. Others proposed they helped the animal push itself off the ground after lying down. More recent theories suggest the arms may have been vestigial evolutionary leftovers from ancestors that had much larger forelimbs. The truth is, we still do not know with certainty what those arms were for. One of the most powerful predators that ever lived carried with it a biological mystery that may never be fully solved. Now, shift your attention away from the age of dinosaurs and consider a creature that lived far more recently enough that its disappearance was witnessed and documented by humans. The dodo bird is perhaps the most famous symbol of extinction in the world. Found only on the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, the dodo was a large, flightless bird that stood about 3 feet tall. It had a large, hooked beak, small wings that were utterly useless for flight, and a plump body. When Portuguese sailors first arrived on Mauritius in the early 1500s, the dodo had never encountered humans or any significant land predators. It had evolved in isolation in a world without danger, and that was precisely what sealed its fate. Here is the fact that shocks most people. From the moment humans first set foot on Mauritius to the moment the last dodo died, fewer than 80 years passed. The species was first recorded by Dutch sailors in 1598. By 1662, the dodo was gone. 80 years, not even a single human lifetime, was all it took to wipe out a species that had existed for millions of years. The dodo was not hunted to extinction solely by humans, though sailors did kill them for food. The real devastation came from the animals that humans brought with them: rats, pigs, and monkeys. These invasive species ravaged the dodo's ground-level nests, eating eggs and chicks. The dodo, which had never needed to defend against such threats, had no evolutionary response. It simply vanished. And here is another detail about the dodo that most people do not know. For nearly 2 centuries after its extinction, many scientists were not even sure the dodo had been a real animal. It sounds incredible, but the dodo became so obscure after its disappearance that some scholars in the 1800s seriously debated whether it was a mythological creature, like a griffin or a unicorn. It was not until the mid-1800s, when subfossil remains were discovered on Mauritius and a few preserved specimens in European museums were re-examined, that the scientific community firmly accepted the dodo as a real, once-living species. An animal that had lived alongside humans was so thoroughly erased that its very existence was questioned. Let us move to the seas now, to an animal whose story is among the most tragic in the history of extinction. The Steller sea cow was a massive marine mammal, a relative of the modern dugong and manatee. But while its living relatives are modest in size, the Steller sea cow was enormous. Adults could reach lengths of up to 30 feet and weigh as much as 11 tons. To visualize that, imagine a creature the size of a school bus, gently gliding through cold northern waters, grazing on kelp. It was a slow, docile, magnificent animal. The Steller sea cow was discovered by European science in 1741, when the German naturalist Georg Wilhelm Steller encountered it during a shipwrecked expedition near the Commander Islands in the Bering Sea. Steller was the only trained scientist to ever observe these animals alive. He described them as gentle, curious, and remarkably unafraid of humans. They lived in shallow coastal waters, feeding on seaweed, and they were so buoyant that their backs often protruded above the surface. Steller noted that when one sea cow was harpooned, others in the group would gather around it, seemingly trying to help, pushing against the ropes or nudging the wounded animal. Here is the devastating fact. From the moment of its scientific discovery to the moment of its total extinction, only 27 years elapsed. By 1768, the Steller sea cow was gone, hunted to extinction by fur traders and sailors who valued its meat, fat, and hide. 27 years, an entire species, millions of years in the making, was annihilated within the span of a single human generation. The speed of its destruction is almost incomprehensible. There are people alive today who have owned the same car for longer than the Steller sea cow survived after being discovered by modern civilization. Now consider the skies. There was once a bird so numerous that its flocks literally darkened the sun. The passenger pigeon of eastern regions was not just a common bird, it was, by many estimates, the most abundant bird species on the entire planet. At its peak population, there may have been as many as 5 billion passenger pigeons alive at one time. To grasp that number, consider that this single species may have represented up to 40% of the total bird population of its entire range. Flocks were so dense and so vast that when they passed overhead, they could block out sunlight for hours. Eyewitness accounts from the 1800s describe skies going dark in the middle of the day as billions of birds flew past in columns that stretched for hundreds of miles. The passenger pigeon was a sleek, elegant bird, about 16 inches long, with a blue-gray back, a reddish breast, and a long, tapered tail. It was fast, capable of flying at speeds of over 60 miles per hour. It nested in enormous colonies, with hundreds of nests crammed into a single tree. And it was this very abundance, this staggering concentration, that made it vulnerable. Commercial hunters slaughtered passenger pigeons on an industrial scale. They used nets, guns, and even dynamite to harvest birds by the millions. The pigeons were shipped by the trainload to markets in major cities where they were sold cheaply as food. The destruction was relentless, systematic, and utterly unsustainable. The last known passenger pigeon in the world was a female named Martha. She lived in the Cincinnati Zoo. On September 1, 1914, Martha died in her cage. She was 29 years old. With her death, a species that had once numbered in the billions was gone forever. The transition from 5 billion to 0 took less than a century. It remains one of the most dramatic population collapses in recorded history. And here is the detail that haunts conservationists to this day: people saw it happening. Scientists warned that the passenger pigeon was declining. Hunters knew the flocks were getting smaller. But the killing continued because the profits were too tempting and the assumption was always the same. There were so many birds that they could never truly run out. That assumption was catastrophically wrong. Let us travel further back in time, long before humans existed, to an era when the oceans were ruled by a predator so terrifying that it makes the great white shark look like a minnow. The Megalodon, Ototus megalodon, was the largest predatory shark that ever lived. It dominated the world's oceans from roughly 23 million years ago to about 3.6 million years ago. Estimates of its size vary, but most scientists believe that adults could reach lengths of 50 to 60 feet, with some potentially exceeding that. Its jaws could open wide enough to engulf a small car. Its teeth, which are among the most common megalodon fossils found today, could be over 7 inches long, roughly the size of a human hand. But the truly staggering fact about the megalodon is not its size, it is its bite. Scientists have calculated that the megalodon's bite force may have been as high as 40,000 pounds, more than 3 times the bite force of the Tyrannosaurus rex. This was not just the strongest bite of any shark. It was potentially the strongest bite of any animal that has ever existed on this planet. The megalodon could have crushed the skull of a whale with a single snap of its jaws, and that is exactly what it did. Fossil evidence shows that megalodons preyed on whales, dolphins, sea turtles, and other large marine animals. Whale bones have been found with massive bite marks that match the megalodon's tooth pattern, and some of these bones show signs of healing, suggesting that the whales survived initial attacks, which means they were being hunted, not just scavenged. Here is something else about the megalodon that most people find surprising. Despite being perhaps the most fearsome ocean predator in history, the megalodon may have been brought down not by a bigger predator, but by climate change and competition from a much smaller animal. Around 3 to 4 million years ago, global temperatures dropped significantly. Ocean currents shifted. The large, warm, shallow seas that the megalodon preferred began to disappear. At the same time, a new apex predator was evolving, the great white shark. While much smaller than the megalodon, great whites were faster, more adaptable, and better suited to the changing ocean conditions. Some researchers believe that great whites may have outcompeted juvenile megalodons for food, slowly undermining the larger species' ability to sustain its population. The king of the ancient seas may have been dethroned not by a single catastrophic event, but by a slow, grinding combination of environmental change and evolutionary competition. Now let us consider an animal that most people have heard of but few truly understand, the woolly mammoth. These magnificent creatures roamed the cold grasslands and tundra of the northern hemisphere for hundreds of thousands of years. They were superbly adapted to frigid environments. Their thick, shaggy coats could be over 3 feet long, providing insulation against temperatures that could plunge far below zero. Beneath their skin, they carried a layer of fat up to 3 inches thick. Their ears were small compared to modern elephants, in adaptation to reduce heat loss. Their hemoglobin, the protein in blood that carries oxygen, was specially modified to release oxygen more efficiently at low temperatures. They were, in every sense, built for the cold. But here is a fact about woolly mammoths that challenges common assumptions. They were not always massive. While the largest woolly mammoths could stand over 11 feet tall at the shoulder and weigh around 6 tons, some populations evolved in the opposite direction. On Rangel Island, a remote landmass in the Arctic Ocean, a population of woolly mammoths became isolated when rising sea levels cut the island off from the mainland roughly 10,000 years ago. Stranded on a small island with limited food resources, these mammoths underwent a process called insular dwarfism, the same evolutionary phenomenon that produced miniature elephants on Mediterranean islands and tiny dinosaurs on ancient landmasses. The Rangel Island mammoths shrank over generations, eventually reaching shoulder heights of about 6 feet, roughly the size of a large horse. These dwarf mammoths survived on their island refuge until approximately 4,000 years ago. To put that in perspective, the Great Pyramid of Giza was already standing when the last woolly mammoths were still alive. Ancient Egyptians were building one of the most iconic structures in human history, while the last mammoths were grazing on a remote Arctic island. The overlap between human civilization and woolly mammoths is far more recent than most people realize. There is another detail about mammoths that deserves attention. Because they lived in cold environments, their remains are sometimes preserved in permafrost frozen ground that maintains sub-zero temperatures year-round. In some cases, mammoth carcasses have been found so well preserved that their flesh, hair, and even stomach contents are still intact after tens of thousands of years. In 2013, a team of researchers in Siberia discovered a mammoth carcass so remarkably preserved that when they cut into it, liquid blood flowed out. The blood was still in a liquid state despite the animal having been dead for approximately 10,000 years. This discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community and reignited discussions about the possibility of cloning a woolly mammoth using preserved DNA. While cloning a mammoth remains far beyond current technological capabilities, the preservation of liquid blood after 10 millennia is a testament to the extraordinary conditions of the permafrost and the tantalizing proximity of these ancient animals to the modern age. Let us now turn to a creature that vanished from the earth so recently that color photographs of it exist. The Thylacine, commonly known as the Tasmanian tiger, was not a tiger at all. It was a marsupial, a pouched mammal more closely related to kangaroos and koalas than to any cat or dog. Yet it looked remarkably like a dog. It had a long snout, pointed ears, a lean body, and a stiff tail. Most distinctively, it had a series of dark stripes across its lower back and tail, which is what earned it the nickname tiger. The Thylacine is one of the most extraordinary examples of convergent evolution, the phenomenon in which unrelated species evolve similar body shapes and features because they occupy similar ecological roles. The Thylacine evolved to be a pursuit predator in the same way that wolves and dogs did, despite being separated by over 100 million years of evolutionary history. The last known Thylacine died on September 7, 1936, in the Beaumaris Zoo in Hobart, Tasmania. The animal, whose name and sex have been debated by historians, some records suggest it was a male named Benjamin, while others dispute this, paced restlessly in its concrete enclosure and died of exposure after being locked out of its sleeping quarters on a cold night. Film footage of this last Thylacine exists, and it is haunting to watch. The animal moves with a strange, stiff-legged gait, opens its jaws impossibly wide. Thylacines could open their mouths to an angle of nearly 80 degrees, far wider than any dog or wolf, and stares at the camera with dark, unknowable eyes. You are watching the last of its kind, and it does not know it. Here is the fact that adds a layer of bitter irony to the Thylacine's extinction. The Tasmanian government placed a bounty on Thylacines in 1888, offering money for each animal killed, because farmers believed Thylacines were killing their sheep. The bounty system remained in place for over 2 decades, and thousands of Thylacines were killed for the reward money. By the time the government officially protected the Thylacine, it was 1936, just 59 days before the last one died. The species received legal protection less than 2 months before it ceased to exist. The bureaucratic machinery of conservation arrived just in time to protect nothing. There is another aspect of the Thylacine story that most people are unaware of. Thylacines were not originally restricted to Tasmania. Thousands of years ago, they lived across much of the mainland as well as New Guinea. They disappeared from the mainland roughly 3,000 years ago, and many scientists believe that their extinction on the mainland was caused by competition with dingoes, wild dogs that were introduced to the continent by human settlers around 4,000 years ago. Dingoes never reached Tasmania, which is separated from the mainland by a stretch of ocean, so Thylacines survived there much longer. But on the mainland, the arrival of a competitor that was faster, more social, and better adapted to hunting in packs sealed the Thylacines' fate. By the time Europeans arrived in Tasmania, The island was the species' last refuge, and even that refuge would not hold. Now, let us descend into the oceans once more and meet a creature that stretches the boundaries of what we consider possible in the animal kingdom. The Ammonites were a group of marine animals that existed for over 300 million years, far longer than the dinosaurs. They were cephalopods, related to modern squids and nautiluses, and they lived inside beautifully coiled shells that ranged in size from less than an inch to over 5 feet in diameter. Some species of ammonite grew shells so large that a human could curl up inside them. These were not tiny shellfish. They were substantial ocean-dwelling creatures that came in an astonishing variety of shapes and sizes. Ammonites survived multiple mass extinction events. They endured the Permian-Triassic extinction, the deadliest mass extinction in Earth's history, which wiped out over 90% of all marine species. They survived the Triassic-Jurassic extinction. They diversified and thrived across the world's oceans for hundreds of millions of years. And then, 66 million years ago, the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs finally took the Ammonites too. After surviving 300 million years and multiple apocalyptic events, they were finally overcome. Their fossils are among the most common and most beautiful of all ancient remains, and they are found on every continent, including Antarctica. For 300 million years, ammonites were a fundamental part of ocean ecosystems. And then, in geological terms, they were gone in an instant. Here is a fact about ammonites that paleontologists find particularly fascinating. Despite having studied ammonite fossils for centuries, scientists still do not know what most ammonites actually looked like. The shells preserve beautifully, but the soft bodies, the tentacles, the eyes, the mantle, almost never fossilize. We have the houses, but not the occupants. Based on their relationship to modern nautiluses and squids, scientists can make educated guesses, but the truth is that the living ammonite, the creature inside the shell, remains largely a mystery. We can hold a 300 million year old ammonite shell in our hands, marvel at its perfect spiral geometry, and still not truly know the animal that built it. Speaking of animals that defy expectation, consider the terror birds, the Phorusrhacids. These were enormous, flightless, predatory birds that dominated parts of the world for tens of millions of years. The largest species stood over 10 feet tall, weighed over half a ton, and had massive, hooked beaks that they used to kill prey. Terror birds were the apex predators of their ecosystems. They could run at speeds estimated at up to 30 miles per hour, and they killed by striking downward with their enormous beaks, delivering blows powerful enough to shatter bone. Some species may have also used a technique similar to modern secretary birds, stamping on prey with their powerful legs to crush it before delivering the killing blow with their beak. Here is the surprising part. Terror birds did not coexist with dinosaurs. They evolved after the dinosaurs went extinct. When the non-avian dinosaurs disappeared 66 million years ago, they left behind a world full of ecological vacancies. The role of large terrestrial predator was suddenly open, and in parts of the world, birds, the only surviving dinosaurs, stepped into that role. For nearly 60 million years, giant predatory birds ruled the land. They were not a brief evolutionary experiment. They were a sustained, successful dynasty that outlasted most mammalian predator lineages. Terror birds finally went extinct roughly 2 million years ago, likely due to a combination of climate change and competition from newly arrived mammalian predators. Their disappearance marked the end of an era in which birds, not mammals, sat atop the food chain on entire continents. Let us now talk about an animal whose extinction reveals the dark side of human curiosity and scientific collection, the great auk. The great auk was a large, flightless seabird that stood about 30 inches tall. It was black and white, an excellent swimmer, and it lived in colonies on rocky islands in the North Atlantic. It is sometimes called the original penguin. In fact, the word penguin was originally used to describe the great auk before it was applied to the similar-looking but unrelated birds of the southern hemisphere. The great auk was hunted for centuries, for its feathers, its fat, its meat, and its eggs. By the early 1800s, it was clear that the species was in serious decline. and here is where the story takes its darkest turn. As great auks became rarer, their value to collectors and museums skyrocketed. Eggs, skins, and stuffed specimens became prized items that wealthy collectors would pay enormous sums to acquire. The rarer the bird became, the more valuable each individual was, and the more incentive there was to kill the remaining ones. This created a vicious cycle, a death spiral driven not by hunger or necessity, but by the desire to own a piece of something vanishing. The last pair of great auks known to science was killed on Elde Island, off the coast of Iceland, on June 3, 1844. A group of men was hired specifically to find and kill the last remaining birds so that their skins could be sold to a collector. They found a pair sitting on a nest with a single egg. They strangled both birds. In the struggle, the egg was crushed underfoot, and with that, the great auk was gone. The species was not killed by accident or ignorance. The last individuals were deliberately hunted down because their rarity made them valuable. Their extinction was a calculated act driven by the economics of scarcity. Today, great auk eggs are among the rarest and most valuable natural history objects in the world. Fewer than 80 eggs are known to exist in museums and private collections. A single great auk egg can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars at auction. The species is worth more dead than it ever was alive. There is a grim irony in that. Let us shift our focus now to the Ice Ages, a period that produced some of the most spectacular megafauna the world has ever known. The saber-toothed cat, Smilodon, is one of the most iconic Ice Age animals. Its most famous feature was, of course, its enormous canine teeth, which could grow up to 11 inches long in the largest species, Smilodon populator. These teeth were curved, serrated, and designed for one purpose, to deliver devastating bites to large prey. But here is a fact about Smilodon that most people get wrong. Despite its popular name, the saber-toothed cat was not technically a cat. It belonged to a subfamily called Machaerodontini, which diverged from the lineage that led to modern cats millions of years ago. Smilodon was not a direct ancestor of lions, tigers, or any living feline. It was a cousin, a member of a separate evolutionary branch that went extinct without leaving any direct descendants. When you look at a lion today, you are not looking at a descendant of the saber-toothed cat. You are looking at a member of a different family entirely. Another surprising fact about Smilodon relates to those famous teeth. You might assume that an animal with 11-inch canines would have an incredibly powerful bite. In fact, the opposite was true. Smilodon's bite force was relatively weak compared to modern big cats. A modern lion has a stronger pound-for-pound bite than Smilodon did. The reason is that Smilodon's elongated teeth actually limited how wide it could open its jaws, and the muscles that powered its bite had to be arranged differently to accommodate the oversized canines. So how did Smilodon kill? Scientists believe it used its powerful neck and forebody muscles to drive its saber teeth downward into prey, rather than biting in the conventional sense. It was less like a bite and more like a stabbing motion. Smilodon would wrestle its prey to the ground, pin it, and then plunge its sabers into the throat or belly. The teeth were not designed to crush, they were designed to pierce and slice. There is also evidence, found in the La Brea tar pits, that Smilodon may have been a social animal. Many Smilodon fossils show healed injuries, broken bones that mended, infections that were survived. An injured predator that lives alone would likely starve before its wounds healed. The fact that so many Smilodon individuals survived serious injuries suggests that they may have lived in groups and cared for injured members, sharing food and providing protection. If this interpretation is correct, then these fearsome predators may have had a surprisingly compassionate social structure. Now let us consider a truly bizarre extinction, one that involves an animal that was driven to extinction not once, but essentially erased from human memory and then rediscovered as a fossil. The giant ground sloths were among the largest land mammals to ever walk the earth after the age of dinosaurs. The biggest species, Megatherium, stood about 20 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs and weighed approximately 4 tons, as heavy as an elephant. These were not the small, slow, tree-dwelling sloths we know today. These were massive, powerful animals with enormous claws that could be over a foot long. Here is the fact that surprises most people about giant ground sloths. Despite their enormous size and fearsome claws, most species were herbivores. They used their claws not to kill, but to pull down branches and strip leaves from trees. Some species may have been partially omnivorous, supplementing their plant diet with carrion or small animals, but the primary role of those intimidating claws was feeding, not fighting. A 20-foot-tall animal with foot-long claws that spent its days peacefully browsing on leaves, it is an image that defies expectations. Giant ground sloths also had a remarkable defense mechanism. Embedded within their skin were thousands of small, bony nodules called osteoderms, essentially a layer of natural chain mail beneath their fur. This dermal armor made their skin incredibly tough and resistant to the teeth and claws of predators. A saber-toothed cat trying to bite through the skin of a giant ground sloth would have encountered a layer of bony armor that could deflect or blunt the attack. These gentle giants were not defenseless. They were walking fortresses. Giant ground sloths survived in parts of the world until roughly 10,000 years ago, and some island populations may have persisted even more recently. Their disappearance coincides closely with the arrival of humans in their habitats, and most scientists believe that human hunting played a significant role in their extinction. The bones of giant ground sloths have been found with cut marks made by stone tools, confirming that early humans hunted and butchered them. An animal that had survived millions of years and endured ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and shifting climates was ultimately brought down by small, clever primates with sharpened rocks. Let us move now to one of the strangest animals to ever exist, an animal so unusual that when the first specimen was sent to European scientists, they literally thought it was a hoax. The quagga was a subspecies of the plains zebra, but it looked like no zebra alive today. The front half of its body was striped like a typical zebra, but the stripes gradually faded along its midsection and disappeared entirely on its hindquarters, which were a solid brownish color. It looked as though someone had started painting a zebra and given up halfway through. When European scientists first examined quagga skins and illustrations, some suspected that the specimens were fakes, that someone had taken a horse and painted stripes on it, or had somehow combined the skins of two different animals. The quagga lived in the grasslands of southern Africa and was once abundant, but European colonists hunted it relentlessly for its meat and hide and to reduce competition with domestic livestock for grazing land. The last wild quagga was probably shot in the 1870s. The very last quagga of all, the last individual of its kind, died in a zoo in Amsterdam on August 12, 1883. A photograph of this animal exists, taken at the London Zoo sometime in the 1870s. It shows a mare standing in a paddock, her half-striped body caught in what appears to be afternoon light. She stares at the camera with calm, dark eyes. It is one of the only photographs ever taken of a living quagga, and it is profoundly moving to look at, a frozen moment of a creature standing on the edge of oblivion. Here is the fascinating postscript to the quagga story. In the 1980s, DNA analysis confirmed that the quagga was not a separate species, but a subspecies of the plains zebra. This discovery launched a controversial project to try to breed back the quagga by selectively breeding plains zebras that showed reduced striping. The project, based in South Africa, has produced animals that visually resemble the quagga, but whether these animals can truly be considered quaggas, whether appearance alone defines a subspecies, remains a subject of intense scientific debate. You can recreate the pattern, but can you recreate the animal? The question strikes at the heart of what it means for a species to exist. Now, let us explore the waters once more and consider an ocean predator that was so massive, so powerful, and so ancient that it makes the Megalodon look young. The Dunkleosteus was an armored fish that lived approximately 380 million years ago, during the Devonian period, often called the Age of Fishes. It was one of the largest and most fearsome predators of its time. Adults could reach lengths of over 30 feet, and their heads and the front portions of their bodies were covered in thick, bony plates of armor. But the most remarkable feature of the Dunkleosteus was its mouth. Dunkleosteus did not have teeth. Instead, it had two pairs of sharp, bony plates that functioned like self-sharpening blades. As the animal opened and closed its jaws, the bony plates scraped against each other, constantly honing their edges. Scientists have calculated that Dunkleosteus could snap its jaws shut in approximately 1/50th of a second, one of the fastest bite speeds ever recorded in any animal, and its bite force has been estimated at over 8,000 pounds per square inch, making it one of the most powerful bites in the history of life on Earth, rivaling or exceeding that of the Tyrannosaurus rex, despite the Dunkleosteus living nearly 300 million years before the T-Rex even evolved. Here is the truly remarkable thing about Dunkleosteus. Despite being an apex predator with armor plating and a bone-crushing bite, it left no descendants. The entire group to which it belonged, the placoderms or armored fishes, went completely extinct at the end of the Devonian period. Every single species, an entire class of fishes which had dominated the world's oceans for millions of years, vanished without a trace. No modern fish is a direct descendant of Dunkleosteus or any other placoderm. They were an evolutionary dead end, a supremely successful dead end, but a dead end nonetheless. 380 million years later, all we have are their fossilized armor plates and the reconstructed nightmares of their enormous, blade-lined jaws. Let us now turn to one of the most haunting extinctions in modern history, an animal whose loss was so senseless and so preventable that it became a rallying cry for the conservation movement. The Pyrenean ibex, also known as the bucardo, was a subspecies of the Spanish ibex that lived in the Pyrenees Mountains. It was a stocky, sure-footed mountain goat with large, curved horns and a thick coat adapted to cold alpine environments. For centuries, it was hunted for its meat, horns, and hide. By the 20th century, its numbers had dwindled to a handful. The last Pyrenean ibex was a female named Celia. She was found dead on January 6, 2000, killed by a falling tree. With her death, the subspecies was declared extinct, but the story does not end there. Before Celia died, scientists had taken tissue samples from her and preserved them. In 2003, a team of researchers attempted to clone Celia using her preserved DNA, implanting a cloned embryo into a domestic goat surrogate. The clone was born alive, making the Pyrenean ibex the first extinct species to ever be extincted. For a few brief minutes, the bucardo existed again, but the newborn clone had a severe lung defect. It struggled to breathe from the moment of its birth. Within 10 minutes, it died. The Pyrenean ibex had the tragic distinction of going extinct twice, once naturally and once in a laboratory. The experiment demonstrated that cloning extinct species is theoretically possible, but it also revealed the enormous technical challenges involved. The dream of extinction is tantalizing, but the reality, at least for now, is heartbreakingly difficult. Now consider an animal that lived in the same era as early humans and was so enormous that its name literally means giant lizard. The Megalania varanus priscus was the largest terrestrial lizard that ever lived. It roamed the continent of Australia during the Pleistocene epoch, from roughly 2 million years ago to about 40,000 years ago. Estimates of its size vary, but most scientists believe it reached lengths of 15 to 18 feet, with some estimates suggesting it could have been even larger, up to 23 feet. It weighed over 1,300 pounds. Imagine a Komodo dragon, the largest living lizard, at about 10 feet, and then double it. That was the Megalania. Here is the fact that makes the Megalania truly terrifying. Like its modern relative, the Komodo dragon, the Megalania may have been venomous. Recent research has revealed that Komodo dragons possess venom glands that produce toxins capable of lowering blood pressure, preventing blood clotting, and inducing shock. If the Megalania shared this trait, and given its close evolutionary relationship to the Komodo dragon, many scientists believe it did, then a bite from this giant lizard would have delivered a massive dose of venom, along with devastating physical trauma. A single bite could have caused catastrophic blood loss, organ failure, and death, even if the initial wound was not immediately fatal. The Megalania would simply bite its prey and then follow it, waiting for the venom and blood loss to do their work. The Megalania disappeared around the same time that humans arrived in Australia, approximately 40 to 50,000 years ago. Whether humans directly hunted the Megalania, or whether human activities such as landscape burning and prey depletion contributed to its extinction, remains debated, but the timing is suggestive. For the first humans to set foot on the continent, the Megalania would have been a very real and very dangerous threat, a venomous lizard the size of a car that could outrun a human over short distances. The nightmares of those early settlers were not imaginary. They were scaled, fanged, and very much alive. Let us now examine an extinction that unfolded not in the distant past, but within living memory. The Baiji, or Chinese river dolphin, was a freshwater dolphin that lived in the Yangtze River for approximately 20 million years. It was a graceful, pale-colored animal with a long, narrow beak and tiny eyes. Its vision had degenerated over millions of years of living in the murky waters of the Yangtze, and it relied almost entirely on echolocation to navigate and find food. The Baiji was sometimes called the goddess of the Yangtze and held a special place in local folklore and culture. In 2006, an international team of scientists conducted an intensive 6-week survey of the entire known range of the Baiji in the Yangtze River. They used visual observation, acoustic monitoring, and every available detection method. They found nothing. Not a single Baiji was detected. In 2007, the species was declared functionally extinct, the first large-bodied mammal to be driven to extinction in over 50 years. Its disappearance was caused by a combination of factors: fishing nets in which Baiji became entangled and drowned, boat strikes from the heavy commercial traffic on the Yangtze, pollution that contaminated its food supply, and the construction of dams that fragmented its habitat. Here is the fact that makes the Baiji's extinction so profoundly unsettling. The Baiji had survived for 20 million years. It had endured ice ages, sea level changes, tectonic shifts, and countless other environmental upheavals. It survived everything that nature threw at it. And then in the span of a few decades, the blink of an eye in evolutionary terms, industrialization and human activity wiped it out. An animal that had outlived civilizations, outlived geological epochs, outlived entire categories of other species, could not survive the modern age. The Baiji is sometimes called the first large animal to go extinct due to the direct impact of human economic development. It is a distinction that carries no honor. Let us now journey back to a world that would be utterly unrecognizable, the Carboniferous period, roughly 300 million years ago. The atmosphere was radically different from today. Oxygen levels were significantly higher, reaching concentrations of approximately 35% compared to today's 21%. This oxygen-rich environment had extraordinary consequences for the size of insects, because insects breathe through a network of tiny tubes called tracheae, which deliver oxygen directly to their cells. Higher oxygen concentrations allowed these tubes to supply oxygen to larger bodies. The result was an era of giant insects that seems almost fictional. The Meganeura was a dragonfly-like insect with a wingspan of over 2.5 feet. Imagine a dragonfly the size of a hawk buzzing through the fern forests of the Carboniferous. The Arthropleura was a millipede relative that could grow over 8 feet long, a segmented armored creature longer than a car, crawling through the ancient undergrowth. Giant cockroach relatives, enormous scorpion-like animals, and other oversized arthropods thrived in this oxygen-rich world. Here is the fact that makes this era relevant to the story of extinction. When oxygen levels eventually declined, dropping from 35% to levels closer to what we have today, these giant insects could no longer sustain their enormous bodies. Their breathing systems simply could not deliver enough oxygen. They shrank over generations, and the largest species went extinct entirely. They were not killed by predators or disease. They were killed by chemistry, by a change in the composition of the atmosphere itself. The air they breathed could no longer support them. It is a reminder that extinction does not always come in the form of a dramatic catastrophe. Sometimes the world simply changes around you, slowly and invisibly, until you can no longer survive in it. Now, let us consider one of the most mysterious mass extinctions in Earth's history, and one that most people have never heard of. Approximately 252 million years ago, at the boundary between the Permian and Triassic periods, the Earth experienced the most devastating extinction event in its history. It is sometimes called the Great Dying. Approximately 90 to 96% of all marine species and roughly 70% of all terrestrial vertebrate species went extinct. Entire ecosystems collapsed. The oceans became so depleted of life that some researchers refer to post-extinction ocean conditions as a dead zone that persisted for millions of years. The cause of the Great Dying is still debated, but the leading hypothesis involves massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia, an event known as the Siberian Traps. These eruptions lasted for roughly 2 million years and released staggering quantities of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other gases into the atmosphere. The result was a cascade of environmental disasters: extreme global warming, ocean acidification, oxygen depletion in the oceans, and the destruction of the ozone layer, which allowed lethal levels of ultraviolet radiation to reach the Earth's surface. Here is the staggering fact about the Great Dying. Life on Earth came closer to total annihilation during this event than at any other time in the planet's history, including the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs. The dinosaur extinction, as devastating as it was, killed roughly 75% of all species. The Great Dying killed over 90%. If the extinction had been even slightly more severe, life on Earth might have been completely eradicated. The planet teetered on the edge of becoming a dead world, and yet life survived. The species that made it through, the survivors of the worst catastrophe in history, went on to diversify and evolve into, eventually, everything alive today. Every human, every animal, every plant, every bacterium on this planet is descended from organisms that somehow endured the Great Dying. We are all children of survivors. Let us now talk about an animal that was so perfectly adapted to its environment that it existed virtually unchanged for hundreds of millions of years and then vanished. The trilobites were marine arthropods that first appeared approximately 521 million years ago during the Cambrian period. They were among the first complex animals to evolve eyes, compound eyes made of crystalline lenses of calcite, a mineral. These were not simple light-detecting patches. They were sophisticated optical instruments that allowed trilobites to see in multiple directions simultaneously. Trilobites diversified into over 20,000 known species. They ranged in size from less than a millimeter to over 2 feet long. They lived on the seafloor, burrowed in sediment, swam in open water, and occupied virtually every marine habitat imaginable. They survived for approximately 270 million years, a staggering span of time. To put that in context, the entire age of dinosaurs, from the first dinosaurs to the last, lasted about 165 million years. Trilobites lasted over 100 million years longer than the dinosaurs did, and yet the Great Dying took them. After surviving 4 previous mass extinction events, each of which reduced their diversity but never eliminated them, the trilobites finally succumbed during the Permian-Triassic extinction. Every single species of trilobite disappeared. An animal group that had been a cornerstone of ocean ecosystems for nearly 300 million years was completely erased. Their fossils are among the most recognizable and most beloved of all ancient remains found on every continent. But the animals themselves are gone, and they have been gone for 250 million years. Now let us consider an extinction that happened not on land or in the sea, but in the sky. The pterosaurs were the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight, beating birds to the skies by roughly 80 million years. They were not dinosaurs, though they lived alongside them. They were a separate group of reptiles that evolved the ability to fly using a membrane of skin stretched from an enormously elongated fourth finger to the body. Some pterosaurs were small, no larger than modern sparrows. Others were truly colossal. The largest pterosaur known to science is Quetzalcoatlus, named after the Aztec feathered serpent god. This animal had a wingspan estimated at 33 to 36 feet, comparable to a small airplane. When standing on the ground, it was as tall as a giraffe. It may have weighed over 500 pounds, and yet somehow it flew. How an animal of that size achieved and sustained flight remains one of the great puzzles of paleontology. Biomechanical models suggest that Quetzalcoatlus launched itself into the air using a powerful vaulting push from its folded wings and hind legs, catapulting itself upward before spreading its wings and catching the air. Once airborne, it likely soared on thermals, much like modern albatrosses, covering vast distances with minimal effort. Here's a startling fact about Quetzalcoatlus. Despite its enormous size and its life in the air, many scientists believe that it spent a significant amount of time on the ground, stalking prey on foot. Some paleontologists have compared its ground behavior to that of a modern stork or heron, walking through open landscapes and snatching up small animals, including possibly baby dinosaurs, with its long, toothless beak. The image of a giraffe-sized flying reptile striding across a Cretaceous plain, picking off small dinosaurs like a heron eating frogs, is one of the most vivid and unsettling pictures in all of paleontology. Pterosaurs disappeared at the same time as the non-avian dinosaurs, 66 million years ago, in the aftermath of the asteroid impact. After ruling the skies for over 160 million years, they left no descendants. Birds, which had evolved independently from a different group of dinosaurs, took over the aerial realm. The skies were inherited not by the heirs of the pterosaurs, but by entirely different creatures. Let us now consider one of the most enigmatic creatures to ever exist, an animal so strange that scientists argued about what it was for over a century. Tullimonstrum, commonly known as the Tully monster, was a soft-bodied marine animal that lived approximately 300 million years ago in shallow tropical seas. It was about 14 inches long and had a body shaped like a torpedo. At the front, it had a long, thin, trunk-like projection that ended in a claw-like structure equipped with small teeth. Its eyes were mounted on a rigid bar that protruded from either side of its head, like a hammerhead shark's, but much more exaggerated. Since its discovery in the 1950s, scientists have debated endlessly about what the Tully monster actually was. Is it a vertebrate, an invertebrate, a worm, a mollusk, a relative of lampreys? Studies have been published arguing for and against each classification, and as of today, there is still no definitive consensus. The Tully monster remains one of the most stubbornly unclassifiable organisms in the fossil record. It fits neatly into no known animal group. It is an orphan of evolution, a creature so unique that it defies the categories we have created to organize the living world. Here is the remarkable detail about the Tully monster. Despite being known from thousands of fossil specimens, it is actually quite common in certain rock formations, and despite over 60 years of study by some of the world's leading paleontologists, we still cannot say with certainty what kind of animal it was. In an age when we can sequence entire genomes and peer into the atomic structure of molecules, a 14-inch marine animal from 300 million years ago continues to baffle us. The Tully monster is a humbling reminder that the history of life on Earth contains mysteries that may never be fully solved. Now, let us return to more recent times and examine an animal whose extinction carries a particularly painful lesson. The Caribbean monk seal was the only seal species native to the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. It was a large, gentle animal that could reach 8 feet in length and weigh over 400 pounds. It had large, dark eyes, a rounded face, and an inquisitive disposition. Early European explorers described the Caribbean monk seal as docile and unafraid of humans, a trait that, as with so many other species, proved to be its undoing. Christopher Columbus, on his second voyage to the New World in 1494, recorded an encounter with Caribbean monk seals. His crew killed 8 of them for food. This was the beginning of centuries of exploitation. The seals were hunted for their oil, which was used to lubricate machinery and as lamp fuel. They were killed for their hides. They were slaughtered simply because they were perceived as competition for fish. By the early 20th century, sightings had become extremely rare. The last confirmed sighting of a Caribbean monk seal was in 1952 at Serranilla Bank, a small atoll in the Western Caribbean. Despite numerous searches over the following decades, no more seals were found. In 2008, after a 5-year review, the species was officially declared extinct. It was the first seal species to go extinct due to human activity. Here is the fact that makes the Caribbean monk seal's story particularly tragic. It was one of 3 species of monk seal in the world. Of the remaining 2, the Mediterranean monk seal is critically endangered, with fewer than 700 individuals surviving, and the Hawaiian monk seal is endangered, with a population of roughly 1,400. The monk seal family is being systematically erased. 1 species is already gone, the other 2 are fighting for survival. If current trends continue, the world may lose all 3 monk seal species within the coming decades. Let us now travel to the remote islands of the Indian Ocean for another extraordinary story. The elephant bird of Madagascar, Epiornis maximus, was one of the largest birds that ever lived. It stood over 10 feet tall and weighed approximately 1,600 pounds, nearly half a ton. It was flightless, with small, vestigial wings and massive, powerful legs. Its eggs were the largest of any known animal, with a volume equivalent to roughly 150 chicken eggs. A single elephant bird egg could hold over 2 gallons of liquid. Fragments of these enormous eggs are still found in Madagascar today, and intact or near intact eggs occasionally surface, commanding enormous prices from collectors. The elephant bird lived alongside humans for centuries after people first arrived on Madagascar roughly 2,000 years ago. It is believed to have gone extinct between the 13th and 17th centuries, though the exact date is uncertain. Its disappearance was likely caused by a combination of hunting, habitat destruction, and the impact of introduced species. Here is the fact about the elephant bird that connects it to a much larger story. Many scholars believe that the elephant bird was the inspiration for the legendary roc, the giant bird of Middle Eastern and South Asian mythology that was said to be large enough to carry off elephants in its talons. Arab traders who visited Madagascar in the Middle Ages may have seen elephant birds or their enormous eggs, and carried stories of these giant birds back to the trading ports of the Persian Gulf and beyond, where the tales were embellished over generations into the legend of the roc. If this theory is correct, then the elephant bird's legacy lives on not just in fossil fragments and eggshell shards, but in the mythology and literature of civilizations that never saw the living animal. Sometimes when a species goes extinct, it does not disappear from human culture. It transforms. It becomes something else, a legend, a myth, a story told to children about a bird so big it could carry an elephant. Let us now explore one of the most peculiar evolutionary stories in the history of extinction. The moa were a group of flightless birds that lived in New Zealand. There were 9 species, ranging in size from the turkey-sized upland moa to the enormous South Island giant moa, which stood up to 12 feet tall, making it the tallest bird that ever lived, taller even than the elephant bird. The moa had no wings at all, not small wings, not vestigial wings, but literally no wings. They were the only known birds to have completely lost every trace of wing structure. Even kiwis, their closest living relatives, have tiny, hidden wings. The moa had none. The moa evolved in New Zealand in the absence of terrestrial mammals. For millions of years, New Zealand was a land of birds. There were no native land mammals except bats. Birds filled every ecological role: herbivore, predator, scavenger. The moa were the dominant herbivores, filling the role that deer, antelope, and other grazing mammals filled on other continents. And the moa's only natural predator was another bird, Haast's eagle, which we will discuss shortly. The Maori people arrived in New Zealand approximately 700 years ago. Within 2 centuries of human arrival, all 9 species of moa were extinct. Hunting was the primary cause. The moa, which had evolved without mammalian predators and had no instinctive fear of ground-dwelling hunters, were easy targets. Archaeological evidence shows that early Maori settlements generated enormous quantities of moa bones, indicating that the birds were hunted intensively. Some kill sites contain the remains of thousands of individual moas. Here is the additional detail that makes the moa story so compelling. The extinction of the moa triggered a cascade that led to the extinction of another species, the Haast's eagle, the largest eagle that ever lived. With a wingspan of up to 10 feet and weighing over 30 pounds, the Haast's eagle was a fearsome predator that had evolved specifically to hunt moa. It would attack from above, diving at speeds of up to 50 miles per hour, striking the moa's head or neck with its massive talons, which were comparable in size to a tiger's claws. When the moa disappeared, the Haast's eagle lost its primary food source. Unable to sustain itself on the smaller prey that remained, it followed the moa into extinction within a few decades. The moa and the Haast's eagle represent a perfect example of an extinction cascade, the phenomenon in which the loss of one species triggers the loss of others that depended on it. Ecosystems are not collections of independent parts. They are webs of interdependence. Pull one thread and others unravel. Now let us venture into the realm of truly ancient life and consider one of the most mysterious extinction events in history, one that happened long before any animal with a backbone existed. Approximately 540 million years ago, the Earth was home to a collection of organisms so strange, so alien in appearance that they have been given their own name, the Ediacaran biota. These were the first large, complex multicellular organisms to appear on Earth. They lived on the seafloor during the Ediacaran period, and they looked like nothing alive today. Some Ediacaran organisms resembled fronds or leaves. Others looked like discs, bags, or quilted mattresses. Dickinsonia was a flat, oval creature with rib-like segments that could grow over 4 feet long. Charnia looked like a fern frond embedded in the seafloor. Kimberella may have been an early relative of mollusks, but even that classification is debated. Many Ediacaran organisms cannot be classified into any existing animal phylum. They appear to represent an entirely separate experiment in multicellular life, a trial run that the universe conducted before settling on the animal body plans that exist today. Here is the haunting fact. The Ediacaran biota disappeared almost entirely at the beginning of the Cambrian period, when the first recognizable animals, things with shells, eyes, legs, and jaws, suddenly appeared in the fossil record. This transition, known as the Cambrian explosion, marks the most dramatic diversification of life in Earth's history. But what happened to the Ediacaran organisms? Were they outcompeted by the new Cambrian animals? Were they eaten by the first predators? Did they simply fail to adapt to changing conditions? We do not know. Their disappearance is one of the oldest and deepest mysteries in the history of life. An entire world of strange, soft-bodied creatures flourished for millions of years and then vanished, replaced by the ancestors of everything we recognize as an animal today. We are the inheritors of their world, and we do not understand why they left it. Let us come back to more familiar territory and talk about an animal whose name is synonymous with cold weather survival, the Irish elk. Despite its name, the Irish elk was neither exclusively Irish nor an elk. It was a species of giant deer, Megaloceros giganteus, that ranged across Europe and Asia during the Pleistocene. It is famous for one thing above all, its antlers. The Irish elk possessed the largest antlers of any deer that has ever lived. A mature male's antlers could span over 12 feet from tip to tip and weigh nearly 90 pounds. They were magnificent, sweeping structures that would have been visible from a great distance, a living display of biological excess. Here is the puzzling fact about the Irish elk's antlers. Many scientists believe that these enormous antlers may have contributed to the species' extinction. The antlers were so large and so heavy that they imposed significant metabolic costs. Growing a new set of antlers every year, as deer do, required vast quantities of calcium and phosphorus, minerals that had to be extracted from the animal's diet. If food became scarce, the energy devoted to antler growth could not be redirected to survival. Additionally, the antlers may have made it difficult for the Irish elk to navigate through the increasingly dense forests that spread across its range as the climate warmed at the end of the last ice age. An animal perfectly adapted to open grasslands, with antlers designed to impress mates across vast distances, found itself trapped in a world of trees where those antlers were a liability. The very feature that made it magnificent may have been what killed it. The Irish elk disappeared approximately 7,700 years ago. Its extinction was likely caused by a combination of habitat change, as open grasslands gave way to forests and human hunting. It is another example of an animal brought down not by a single cause, but by the intersection of multiple pressures, each of which it might have survived alone, but which together proved fatal. Let us shift our attention to a creature that most people assume is a figure of pure mythology. The giant ape known as Gigantopithecus was not a myth, it was real. Gigantopithecus blacki was the largest primate that ever lived, standing up to 10 feet tall and weighing as much as 1,200 pounds. It lived in the forests of Southeast Asia from roughly 2 million years ago to approximately 300,000 years ago. We know of its existence primarily from fossilized teeth and jawbones, hundreds of which have been found in China, Vietnam, and other parts of Southeast Asia. Here is the fact that fires the imagination. Gigantopithecus coexisted with early humans. Homo erectus, one of our direct ancestors, lived in the same forests at the same time. Early humans and giant apes shared the same landscapes for hundreds of thousands of years. This raises a tantalizing question. Is the legend of the Yeti, Bigfoot, or Sasquatch rooted in ancient human memories of encountering Gigantopithecus? Some researchers have speculated that stories of enormous, ape-like forest creatures could represent a kind of cultural memory stretching back hundreds of millennia, transmitted through oral tradition from generation to generation. It is a speculative idea, and most scientists are skeptical, but the mere fact that our ancestors walked alongside 10-foot-tall apes is remarkable enough on its own. Gigantopithecus is believed to have gone extinct due to climate change. As ice ages altered the forests of Southeast Asia, the dense bamboo forests on which Gigantopithecus depended shrank. Unlike smaller, more adaptable primates, including our own ancestors, Gigantopithecus could not switch to alternative food sources. Its enormous body required vast quantities of food, and when its preferred habitat contracted, it could not sustain itself. The largest primate in history was brought down not by a predator, not by disease, but by a changing climate that gradually removed the foundation of its existence. Now, let us examine one of the most iconic and heartbreaking extinctions in the history of modern conservation, the golden toad. The golden toad of Monteverde, Costa Rica, was a small, brilliantly colored amphibian. Males were a vivid, almost glowing orange gold, while females were darker with red and yellow markings. It was described by science in 1966 and was immediately recognized as one of the most visually striking amphibians in the world. It lived in a tiny area of high-altitude cloud forest, spanning just a few square kilometers. The golden toad was last seen in 1989. In 1987, researchers counted over 1,500 adults gathered at breeding pools. Just 2 years later, in 1989, extensive searches found only a single male. He was never seen again. The species had gone from apparently healthy to functionally extinct in less than 3 years. It was declared extinct in 2004. The golden toad's rapid disappearance was caused primarily by the chytrid fungus, Batrachochytrium dendrobatides, a deadly pathogen that infects the skin of amphibians, disrupting their ability to absorb water and breathe through their skin. The chytrid fungus has been called the most destructive pathogen in recorded history in terms of biodiversity loss. It has driven the decline or extinction of over 200 species of amphibians worldwide. The golden toad was one of its earliest and most visible victims. Here is the unsettling fact about the golden toad's extinction. Its cloud forest habitat in Monteverde was a protected reserve. It was not being logged or developed. The toad was not being hunted or collected. It lived in one of the most carefully preserved ecosystems in the tropics, and it went extinct anyway. The chytrid fungus, combined with climate-related changes in moisture patterns that altered the cloud forest's microclimate, killed the golden toad despite every human effort to protect its habitat. The golden toad's extinction demonstrated a painful truth. Sometimes protecting a species' habitat is not enough. Threats can arrive that are invisible, pervasive, and beyond the reach of traditional conservation. You can save the forest and still lose the frog. Let us now talk about an animal that disappeared so long ago that its very existence was unknown until remarkably recently. The Hallucigenia was a tiny marine animal, only about an inch long, that lived approximately 505 million years ago during the Cambrian period. When it was first discovered in the Burgess Shale fossil deposit, it was so bizarre in appearance that the paleontologist who described it, Simon Conway Morris, named it Hallucigenia because it looked like something from a hallucination. And here's the extraordinary fact about Hallucigenia that illustrates just how strange this creature was. When scientists first reconstructed it, they got it completely wrong, upside down and backwards. They initially interpreted its stiff spines as legs and its actual legs as tentacles on its back. Its head was identified as its tail and vice versa. For over a decade, Hallucigenia was displayed in textbooks and museums in a completely inverted orientation. It was not until the 1990s, when better preserved specimens were discovered, that scientists realized their mistake. The spines went on top as defensive structures, and the soft, tubular legs went on the bottom. The front and back were also reversed. An animal that had been displayed and discussed by scientists for years was literally upside down the entire time. It is one of the most famous errors in the history of paleontology, and it speaks to how alien these ancient creatures truly were, so far removed from anything alive today that even trained scientists could not tell which end was up. Let us now consider the remarkable and tragic story of the Carolina parakeet. This was a brightly colored parrot, the only parrot species native to the eastern portions of the continent where it lived. It had a green body, a yellow head, and an orange face, and it lived in large, noisy flocks in forests and along rivers. It was abundant, widespread, and by all accounts, an integral part of the ecosystems it inhabited. The Carolina parakeet was hunted relentlessly. Farmers killed them because they fed on crops and orchard fruit. Fashion industries targeted them for their colorful feathers, which were used to adorn hats, and collectors shot them for specimens. But here is the behavioral trait that accelerated their destruction. When one member of a flock was shot, the other parakeets would circle back and hover over their fallen companion, calling out in distress. This behavior, which likely evolved as a social bonding mechanism, made them extraordinarily easy to kill. A hunter could shoot one bird, wait for the others to return, and then shoot them too. Entire flocks could be destroyed one bird at a time because the survivors refused to abandon their dead. The last known Carolina parakeet was a male named Incas, who died at the Cincinnati Zoo on February 21, 1918. He died in the same cage in the same zoo where Martha, the last passenger pigeon, had died less than 4 years earlier. Two iconic species, both driven to extinction, both ending their existence in the same small building in the same city. It is a coincidence that feels less like chance and more like an indictment. Here is a final, chilling detail about the Carolina parakeet. Recent research suggests that the species may have been toxic. Some historical accounts mention that cats that ate Carolina parakeets became sick or died. The birds are believed to have fed on the seeds of cocklebur plants, which contain toxic compounds. If the parakeets sequestered these toxins in their flesh, similar to how poison dart frogs accumulate toxins from their insect diet, they may have been one of the very few toxic bird species in the world. An animal with a built-in chemical defense, a defense that might have protected it from predators for millions of years, was unable to defend against the one predator that did not need to eat it to destroy it. Now, the journey continues. The facts ahead are no less astonishing, the animals no less extraordinary, and the losses no less profound. Let us begin again. Deep beneath the surface of the modern ocean, in the cold, dark waters of the abyss, there are creatures that seem to belong to another world. but even those strange deep-sea animals are familiar compared to what once swam in Earth's ancient seas. The Anomalocaris was one of the first apex predators in the history of life. It lived approximately 500 million years ago during the Cambrian period, and for its time, it was a giant. While most animals of the Cambrian were measured in millimeters or centimeters, Anomalocaris could reach lengths of over 3 feet. In a world of tiny, soft-bodied organisms, it was a monster. Anomalocaris had a flattened, segmented body that it propelled through the water by undulating flexible lobes along its sides, much like a modern cuttlefish. At the front of its head, 2 large, segmented appendages curved inward like grasping arms, designed to seize prey and bring it to its mouth. And that mouth was unlike anything else in the animal kingdom, then or now. It was a circular opening on the underside of the head, ringed with hard tooth like plates arranged in a pattern resembling a pineapple ring. The mouth could contract but never fully close, which means Anomalocaris crushed its prey but may not have been able to completely chew it. Fossilized fecal matter attributed to Anomalocaris contains fragments of trilobites, suggesting that it attacked these hard-shelled animals, crushed them in its circular maw, digested what it could, and expelled the rest. Here's the remarkable fact about Anomalocaris. When it was first discovered, scientists did not recognize it as a single animal. Different parts of its body were found separately and were classified as 3 completely different organisms. The grasping appendages were initially identified as the bodies of shrimp-like creatures, hence the name Anomalocaris, meaning abnormal shrimp. The circular mouth was classified as a jellyfish, and the body itself was thought to be a sea cucumber. For decades, 3 separate animals existed in the scientific literature that were, in reality, all parts of the same creature. It was not until 1985 that paleontologist Harry Whittington and his colleagues assembled the pieces and realized that the shrimp, the jellyfish, and the sea cucumber were all components of a single, terrifying predator. One animal had been split into 3 by the limits of human understanding. It is a vivid illustration of how difficult it can be to reconstruct life from fragments, and how much of the ancient world we may still be misinterpreting. Now let us move forward in time to meet an animal that might be the most tragic case of extinction in the modern era, not because of what was lost, but because of how close we came to saving it. The western black rhinoceros was a subspecies of the black rhinoceros that roamed the savannas and shrublands of central and western Africa. It was a powerful, thick-skinned animal that could weigh over 3,000 pounds, with 2 horns on its snout, the front horns sometimes exceeding 4 feet in length. Like all rhinoceroses, it was a herbivore, browsing on shrubs, leaves, and woody plants with its prehensile upper lip. The western black rhinoceros was hunted relentlessly throughout the 20th century, primarily for its horn. Rhinoceros horn, made of keratin, the same protein that forms human fingernails and hair, has been valued in traditional medicine and as a status symbol in certain cultures for centuries. Despite having no proven medicinal properties, rhinoceros horn has been sold for prices exceeding that of gold by weight. This demand created an irresistible incentive for poachers, and the western black rhinoceros paid the price. In 1980, an estimated several hundred western black rhinoceroses still survived. Conservation efforts were attempted, but they were hampered by political instability, lack of funding, and ongoing poaching. By 2000, fewer than 10 individuals were believed to remain. In 2006, an intensive survey of the subspecies' last known habitat in northern Cameroon found no surviving animals. In 2011, the International Union for Conservation of Nature officially declared the western black rhinoceros extinct. Here is the fact that makes this extinction so agonizing. The western black rhinoceros did not go extinct because we lacked the knowledge to save it. It did not disappear because we did not understand the threats. Conservation biologists had identified the problem, poaching driven by demand for horn, and had proposed solutions. Anti-poaching patrols, habitat protection, captive breeding, demand reduction campaigns, the tools existed. What was lacking was the political will and the financial commitment to deploy those tools effectively. The western black rhinoceros went extinct not because we could not save it, but because we chose not to invest the resources necessary to do so. It is an extinction of neglect, and it is a stain that cannot be washed away. Let us travel back now, far back, to an era that predates complex life itself. For billions of years, Earth's atmosphere contained almost no free oxygen. The air was dominated by nitrogen, carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases. Then, approximately 2.4 billion years ago, something happened that would transform the planet forever. Cyanobacteria, simple, photosynthetic microorganisms, began producing oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis. Over millions of years, oxygen accumulated in the atmosphere, and for the organisms that had evolved in an oxygen-free world, this was catastrophic. The Great Oxidation Event, as it is called, was the first mass extinction caused by a living organism. The oxygen produced by cyanobacteria was toxic to most of the anaerobic life forms that then dominated the planet. These organisms, which had thrived for billions of years, were poisoned by the waste product of their microscopic neighbors. Entire communities of anaerobic microbes were killed or driven into the few remaining oxygen-free environments, deep ocean sediments, underground aquifers, the guts of animals. The Great Oxidation Event restructured the entire biosphere. It made complex oxygen-breathing life possible, including, eventually, us. But it did so by exterminating much of the life that existed before it. Here is the fact that puts this in a broader perspective. The cyanobacteria that caused the Great Oxidation Event did not intend to destroy the world around them. They were simply doing what organisms do, metabolizing, growing, reproducing. The devastation they caused was an unintended consequence of their success. In this sense, the Great Oxidation Event is a mirror held up to our own era. Humans, too, are transforming the atmosphere and the biosphere through our metabolic activities, burning fossil fuels, clearing forests, altering the chemistry of air and water. We are not the first species to reshape the planet. We are the first to do it knowingly. Whether that knowledge will translate into wisdom, into the ability to avoid the consequences that the cyanobacteria blindly triggered, remains to be seen. Let us now consider an animal whose story illuminates the strange and sometimes cruel dynamics of island evolution. The Falkland Islands wolf, also known as the wara, was the only native land mammal of the Falkland Islands, a remote archipelago in the South Atlantic. It was a medium-sized canid, roughly the size of a coyote, with a tawny coat and a bushy tail. When European explorers first arrived on the Falkland Islands, they were astonished to find this wolf-like animal on islands that were hundreds of miles from any continent. How had a terrestrial mammal reached such an isolated place? The answer, revealed through DNA analysis, is that the Falkland Islands wolf's ancestors likely crossed to the islands during the last ice age, when lower sea levels created temporary land bridges or made the ocean crossing short enough to navigate. Once isolated on the islands, the wolves evolved in the absence of significant predators and with limited prey. They became remarkably tame and curious, so tame that they would approach humans without fear, even allowing themselves to be petted or fed by hand. This tameness was their death sentence. When European settlers arrived in the 18th and 19th centuries, the wolves approached them out of curiosity, and the settlers killed them. They were shot, poisoned, and clubbed. Sailors lured them close by holding out pieces of meat in one hand while hiding a knife in the other. The wolves, having evolved without land predators, had no instinct to flee. Charles Darwin, who visited the Falkland Islands during the voyage of the Beagle in 1833, observed the wara's fearlessness and predicted, correctly, that the species would soon be extinct. He wrote that within a very few years after these islands shall have become regularly settled, in all probability this fox will be classed with the dodo as an animal which has perished from the face of the earth. The last known Falkland Islands wolf was killed in 1876. Darwin's prediction had taken less than 50 years to come true. An animal that had survived thousands of years on remote islands, that had adapted to harsh conditions and limited resources, was wiped out within a single century of contact with humans. Its trust in approaching strangers, a behavior that had served it perfectly well for millennia, became the very thing that destroyed it. Now let us talk about one of the most fascinating and least understood mass extinctions in Earth's history, the late Devonian extinction, which occurred approximately 375 million years ago. Unlike the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs, the late Devonian extinction was not a single event, but a series of pulses spread over millions of years. During these pulses, an estimated 75% of all species on Earth disappeared, with marine life being hit especially hard. Reef ecosystems, which had been thriving for millions of years, were virtually annihilated. It would take over 100 million years for reef systems to fully recover. Here is the surprising fact about the late Devonian extinction. Scientists still do not know what caused it. Multiple hypotheses have been proposed: volcanic activity, asteroid impacts, changes in ocean chemistry, the evolution of land plants, but none has been definitively proven. One of the most intriguing theories involves plants. During the Devonian period, the first large plants and trees evolved on land. As their root systems spread, they broke down rocks and released nutrients into rivers and oceans. This nutrient influx may have triggered massive algal blooms in the oceans, which consumed oxygen as they decomposed, creating vast dead zones where marine life could not survive. If this theory is correct, it means that the evolution of forests, one of the most transformative events in the history of life on land, may have inadvertently caused one of the worst mass extinctions in the sea. The greening of the land may have killed the oceans. The late Devonian extinction eliminated many of the dominant marine organisms of the time, including most species of armored fish, many types of corals, and vast numbers of brachiopods and other invertebrates. It reshaped the trajectory of evolution, clearing the stage for new groups of organisms to rise. In the aftermath, sharks diversified into the forms that would dominate ocean ecosystems for the next 300 million years and beyond. The world we see today, the composition of life in the oceans and on land, was profoundly shaped by whatever happened during those mysterious millions of years in the late Devonian, and we still do not fully understand it. Let us now come forward to the modern era and consider the tale of the Zanzibar leopard. Zanzibar is an archipelago off the coast of East Africa, and its main island, Unguja, was once home to a unique subspecies of leopard. The Zanzibar leopard was smaller than its mainland counterparts, adapted to the island's dense tropical forests and limited prey base. For the indigenous people of Zanzibar, the leopard had a complicated and often fearful cultural significance. Many believed that the leopards were kept and controlled by witches, who used them to harm their enemies. This belief that leopards were agents of witchcraft had devastating consequences for the species. Throughout the 20th century, the people of Zanzibar conducted organized campaigns to exterminate leopards. These were not casual hunting expeditions. They were systematic, government-supported eradication programs driven by the belief that the leopards were tools of evil. Hunters were deployed, traps were set, and rewards were offered for killed leopards. By the 1990s, sightings had become extremely rare. Most conservationists believe the Zanzibar leopard is now extinct, though occasional unconfirmed sightings keep a faint hope alive. Here is the fact that makes the Zanzibar leopard story uniquely disturbing among extinctions. This animal was not killed for food, fur, or profit. It was killed because of a belief, a cultural conviction that the leopard was a supernatural threat. The species was driven to extinction by fear and superstition. In most extinction stories, the driving force is greed, hunger, or indifference. In the case of the Zanzibar leopard, it was something older and deeper, the human tendency to destroy what we do not understand, to kill what we fear. The Zanzibar leopard may have been the only large predator in modern history to be systematically exterminated because people believed it was controlled by witches. Now let us explore one of the most bizarre and captivating animals to ever exist, one that was so strange that when European scientists first encountered it, they were convinced it was a fraud. The platypus, of course, is still alive. but its close relative, the Obgerodon theralcuscyled, is not. This was a giant platypus that lived in Australia approximately 5 to 15 million years ago. Based on a single fossilized tooth discovered in the Riverslea fossil site in Queensland, scientists estimated that this ancient platypus was about 3 feet long, roughly twice the size of a modern platypus. And like its modern descendant, it almost certainly had a bill, webbed feet, and the ability to detect electrical fields generated by the muscles of its prey. But here is the truly astonishing fact. The Obgerodon theralcuscyled had functional teeth, something the modern platypus lacks. Adult modern platypuses are toothless, grinding their food with hardened pads in their mouths. The ancient giant platypus, however, had well-developed teeth, suggesting it may have been capable of eating harder or larger prey than its modern relative. Some scientists have speculated that it may have fed on small vertebrates, frogs, fish, perhaps even small turtles, rather than the soft invertebrates that modern platypuses prefer. The discovery of this giant platypus upended assumptions about platypus evolution. Scientists had previously believed that the platypus lineage had been gradually shrinking and simplifying over millions of years. The discovery of a large, toothed species showed that the evolutionary history of the platypus was far more complex, that the lineage had once included larger, more diverse forms before narrowing down to the single small species that survives today. The modern platypus is not the culmination of its lineage. It is the sole, diminished survivor. Let us now turn to the story of an animal that was not merely extinct, but was deliberately and thoroughly erased, an animal whose disappearance was an act of policy. The Atlas bear was the only bear species native to Africa. It lived in the Atlas Mountains of North Africa, in the region that is now Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. It was a relatively small bear, likely weighing between 200 and 400 pounds, with dark brown or black fur. It was the bear that the ancient Romans used in their gladiatorial games. Thousands of Atlas bears were captured and transported to Rome, where they were forced to fight gladiators, lions, and other animals in the Colosseum and other arenas for the entertainment of the public. The Romans' insatiable appetite for spectacle took an enormous toll on the Atlas bear population. Historical records suggest that thousands of bears were killed in arena events over the centuries, but the Romans were not the only threat. Over the following centuries, the Atlas bear was also hunted by local populations and lost habitat as agriculture expanded through the mountain forests. The last Atlas bear is believed to have been killed in the 1870s in the Rif Mountains of Morocco. With its death, Africa lost its only bear species. Here is the poignant detail that resonates across the millennia. The same civilization that celebrated the bear's strength, ferocity, and nobility in the arena was the civilization that began its march toward extinction. The Romans admired the Atlas bear enough to transport it thousands of miles to fight in their greatest public venues. They did not admire it enough to let it live. This is a pattern that repeats throughout the history of extinction, the paradox of destructive admiration, where we celebrate an animal's magnificence while simultaneously destroying it. Let us now examine one of the most significant and least appreciated mass extinctions in Earth's history, one that happened not in the distant geological past, but within the last 50,000 years. It is called the Quaternary Megafauna extinction, and it resulted in the disappearance of the majority of the world's large animals. Across every continent except Africa, the arrival of human beings was followed, within a few thousand years, by the extinction of most species weighing over 100 pounds. In what is now Australia, roughly 46,000 years ago, humans arrived, and within a few millennia, the continent lost its giant wombats, Diprotodon, which weighed over 6,000 pounds and was the largest marsupial that ever lived. It lost its marsupial lion, Thylacoleo, a powerful predator with the strongest bite force of any mammal relative to its size. It lost the Megalania, the giant monitor lizard. It lost giant kangaroos that stood over 7 feet tall. It lost the enormous flightless bird Geniornis, which weighed over 500 pounds. An entire continent's worth of megafauna, large animals that had evolved over millions of years, vanished within a geological heartbeat of human arrival. In parts of Europe and northern Asia, the pattern repeated. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, cave bears, cave lions, giant deer, and dozens of other large species disappeared as human populations expanded. On islands, the pattern was even more dramatic. When humans reached Madagascar approximately 2,000 years ago, the island lost its elephant birds, giant lemurs, some of which weighed over 400 pounds, giant tortoises, and a host of other unique species. When humans reached New Zealand 700 years ago, as we discussed earlier, the moa and the Haast's eagle disappeared within centuries. Here is the fact that makes the quaternary megafauna extinction so significant and so unsettling. The debate over its cause, climate change versus human hunting, has raged for decades, but the evidence increasingly points to humans as the primary driver. Climate change played a role, particularly in the northern hemisphere, where glacial cycles dramatically altered habitats. But on continents and islands where climate remained relatively stable, such as Australia, the correlation between human arrival and megafauna extinction is striking. The simplest explanation, and the one supported by the most evidence, is that humans were extraordinarily effective hunters who entered ecosystems filled with large, slow-reproducing animals that had never encountered a predator like them. These animals had no evolutionary experience with a small, intelligent, tool-wielding, fire-using predator that hunted cooperatively and could pursue prey across vast distances. They were unprepared, and they paid the ultimate price. The quaternary megafauna extinction was not a single event, but a rolling wave that followed human migration around the globe. It is the first planetary-scale extinction caused by a single species, and it happened long before industrialization, long before modern technology, long before civilization as we know it. Our ancestors, armed with nothing more than stone tools, fire, and intelligence, reshaped the biological composition of every continent they reached. We have been an extinction force for far longer than most people realize. Now let us consider an animal whose extinction is so recent and so well documented that scientists were able to watch it happen in real time, the bramble Chemelemes. This was a small, brownish rodent, about 6 inches long, that lived exclusively on Bramble Key, a tiny coral island in the Torres Strait between Australia and Papua New Guinea. The island is very small, only about 5 hectares, and very low, rising just a few feet above sea level. The bramble Chemelemes was the only mammal endemic to the Great Barrier Reef. In 1978, scientists estimated that several hundred melemes lived on the island. By 2004, only a dozen could be found. By 2009, researchers trapped for days and found nothing. Extensive surveys in 2014 confirmed that no melemes remained. In 2016, the species was officially declared extinct. Here is the fact that makes the bramble Chemelemes historically significant. It is widely considered to be the first mammal species to go extinct as a direct result of human-caused climate change. Rising sea levels, driven by global warming, caused repeated inundation of Bramble Key, flooding the island with salt water that destroyed the vegetation on which the melemes depended. Storm surges became more frequent and more severe. The island literally shrank beneath the animal's feet. There was nowhere for it to go. It could not swim to another island. It could not adapt to saltwater flooding. It simply drowned slowly over decades as the ocean rose around it. The bramble Chemelemes is a preview of what is to come. As sea levels continue to rise, countless other low-lying island species, animals and plants that exist nowhere else on Earth, face the same fate. The melemes was the first. It will not be the last. Let us now journey to the ancient world once more and consider one of the most extraordinary animals to ever evolve, the helicoprion. This was a shark-like fish that lived approximately 270 million years ago during the Permian period. It was a large animal, possibly reaching lengths of over 20 feet, but the helicoprion's claim to fame is not its size, it is its teeth. The helicoprion had a tooth whorl, a spiral arrangement of teeth that looked like a circular saw blade embedded in its lower jaw. As new teeth grew, older teeth were not shed, as in modern sharks, but were pushed forward and curled into a tight spiral. The result was a coiled structure that could contain over 150 teeth, arranged in a logarithmic spiral that protruded from the animal's jaw. When the first helicoprion fossils were discovered in the late 1800s, scientists had no idea where on the animal the tooth whorl belonged. Was it on the lower jaw, the upper jaw, the dorsal fin, the tail? For over a century, paleontologists produced wildly different reconstructions, each more creative and more wrong than the last. It was not until 2013 that CT scanning of a well-preserved specimen finally resolved the mystery. The tooth whorl was located in the lower jaw, positioned like a buzz saw that could ratchet prey into the mouth as the jaw closed. The upper jaw had no corresponding teeth, meaning the helicoprion likely sliced its prey against the roof of its mouth using the tooth whorl's serrated edge. It was a feeding mechanism unlike anything that exists in the modern world, a biological circular saw that the animal carried in its own face. The helicoprion survived the Great Dying, the Permian-Triassic extinction that killed over 90% of marine species, but eventually disappeared during the Triassic period, around 225 million years ago. Its tooth whorls are found as fossils on multiple continents, a testament to the animal's wide distribution and long evolutionary success. But the animal itself is gone, and with it, one of the most bizarre and mechanically ingenious feeding strategies ever devised by evolution. Let us now consider a more recent loss, one that happened within the last few hundred years and involves one of the most beautiful birds ever to exist. The Réunion ibis, also known as the Réunion solitaire, was a large, flightless bird that lived on the island of Réunion in the Indian Ocean, east of Madagascar. Historical accounts describe it as a white bird with black wingtips, a large curved beak, and the size of a goose or small turkey. Like the dodo on neighboring Mauritius, the Réunion ibis evolved on an island without significant predators and lost its ability to fly. The Réunion ibis was driven to extinction by the early 18th century, within roughly 100 years of European colonization of the island. Hunting, habitat destruction, and invasive species, rats, cats, and pigs brought by settlers all contributed to its demise. But here is the truly remarkable fact about the Réunion ibis. For centuries after its extinction, scientists were not sure what it was. Historical descriptions were vague and sometimes contradictory. Some scholars thought it was a type of dodo. Others believed it was a flamingo, a type of rail, or a completely unique species. The confusion lasted until subfossil bones were discovered on Réunion in the mid-20th century. Analysis of these bones, combined with DNA extraction from the fossils, finally revealed that the Réunion ibis was indeed an ibis, a relative of the Hadada ibis and sacred ibis of mainland Africa. It had evolved independently on Réunion, growing large and losing its flight in the same pattern seen in so many island birds. The Réunion ibis spent more time being debated than it spent being studied while alive. We argued about what it was for longer than we bothered to observe it when it existed. That fact alone is a kind of epitaph for the species, an admission that our curiosity came too late. Let us now discuss something that is not an animal at all, but a phenomenon, the concept of the extinction vortex. The extinction vortex is a model that describes how small populations spiral toward extinction through a self-reinforcing cycle of decline. When a population becomes very small, it becomes vulnerable to a range of threats that larger populations can withstand. Genetic diversity decreases, making the population more susceptible to disease and less able to adapt to changing conditions. Random events, a bad storm, a disease outbreak, a single poor breeding season, can have catastrophic effects on a small population that would be trivial for a large one. And as the population shrinks, it becomes harder for individuals to find mates, further reducing reproduction and accelerating the decline. Here is the fact that makes the extinction vortex so terrifying. Once a species enters the vortex, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to pull it out. Each factor reinforces the others. Low population leads to low genetic diversity, which leads to reduced fitness, which leads to lower reproduction, which leads to an even lower population. It is a feedback loop with only one exit: extinction. Many species that were technically still alive, still had living individuals, were functionally doomed because they had already entered the vortex. The last few individuals of a species are often not a viable population. They are a ghost population, alive but already dead in evolutionary terms. The extinction vortex explains why conservation efforts must begin early, while populations are still large enough to be viable. Waiting until a species is critically endangered until it has entered the vortex is often waiting too long. By the time we notice that a species is in trouble, the spiral may already be irreversible. Let us now turn to one of the most physically impressive animals to ever walk the earth, the short-faced bear, Arctodus simus. This was the largest bear that ever lived. Standing on all fours, it was about 6 feet tall at the shoulder. When it reared up on its hind legs, it could reach a height of over 12 feet. It weighed up to 2,500 pounds. But the short-faced bear's most distinctive feature was not its size, it was its proportions. Unlike modern bears, which have relatively stocky limbs, the short-faced bear had long, lean legs. It was built not for lumbering, but for speed. Biomechanical analyses suggest that the short-faced bear could run at speeds of 30 to 40 miles per hour, making it the fastest bear that ever lived and one of the fastest large predators of the Pleistocene. Here is the fact that changes how you think about early human life. The short-faced bear lived alongside the first humans to enter its range in the late Pleistocene. Early humans shared the landscape with a bear that was 12 feet tall, weighed over a ton, and could outrun a horse. The psychological impact of encountering such an animal is almost impossible to imagine. Some scientists have even proposed that the short-faced bear may have delayed human migration into certain territories. One hypothesis suggests that the presence of short-faced bears in key corridors may have slowed the southward expansion of human populations for centuries. The bear was not just a predator. It was potentially a barrier, a living wall of fur, muscle, and speed that kept humans at bay. The short-faced bear went extinct approximately 11,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. Its disappearance coincided with the arrival and expansion of human populations and with a period of dramatic climate change. Whether humans hunted it to extinction, outcompeted it for prey, or whether changing climates reduced its food supply, remains uncertain. What is certain is that the largest, fastest bear that ever lived could not survive the combined pressures of a changing world and an increasingly dominant new species, us. Now let us consider an animal whose extinction demonstrates the devastating power of a single introduced predator. The Stevens Island wren was a tiny, nearly flightless bird that lived on Stevens Island, a small, rugged island in the Cook Strait between the North and South Islands of New Zealand. It was a songbird, just a few inches long, with olive-brown plumage and a characteristic habit of scurrying through vegetation rather than flying. It was likely the only flightless songbird in the world. The Stevens Island wren was first described by science in 1894. Within months of its scientific description, it was extinct. The species was discovered and destroyed almost simultaneously. The cause of its extinction was a single animal, a domestic cat named Tibbles, belonging to the lighthouse keeper on Stevens Island. Tibbles roamed the island and brought back dead birds as trophies to the lighthouse. The lighthouse keeper, recognizing the birds as unusual, sent specimens to ornithologists for identification. By the time the scientists realized they were looking at a new species, Tibbles had already killed most or all of the remaining population. Here is the extraordinary detail that makes this story so striking. A single house cat may have single-handedly driven an entire species to extinction. While some historians have questioned whether Tibbles acted alone, feral cats may also have been present on the island. The fundamental story remains true. A tiny, isolated population of flightless birds, confined to a single small island, was exterminated by an introduced predator in a matter of months. The Stevens Island wren went from unknown to science to extinct in less than a year. Its entire known existence in the scientific record spans a period shorter than most magazine subscriptions. This story is not just a historical curiosity. It is a stark illustration of the vulnerability of island species to introduced predators. Cats, rats, mongooses, and other animals introduced by humans to islands around the world have driven hundreds of species to extinction. Islands, which serve as evolutionary laboratories where unique species develop in isolation, become death traps when a new predator arrives. The Stevens Island wren is a symbol of this ongoing crisis, a crisis that continues today on islands around the globe. Let us now consider the ancient oceans one more time, and one of the most remarkable evolutionary experiments ever conducted by nature. The ichthyosaurs were marine reptiles that dominated the world's oceans for over 160 million years, from the early Triassic to the late Cretaceous period. They were not dinosaurs. They evolved independently from land-dwelling reptiles that returned to the sea, much as whales evolved from land-dwelling mammals. And like whales, ichthyosaurs eventually became so adapted to marine life that they bore live young and could never return to land. Early ichthyosaurs looked somewhat like lizards with flippers, but over millions of years they evolved into sleek, streamlined forms that bore an uncanny resemblance to modern dolphins, a classic example of convergent evolution. They had elongated snouts, large eyes, dorsal fins, and crescent-shaped tail fins. Some species were small, just a few feet long. Others were enormous. The largest ichthyosaur known, Shastasaurus, could reach lengths of over 65 feet, longer than a sperm whale. Here is the fact that makes ichthyosaurs truly remarkable. They had the largest eyes of any known animal that has ever lived. The eyes of some ichthyosaur species measured over 10 inches in diameter, roughly the size of a dinner plate. These enormous eyes were adaptations for deep diving, allowing ichthyosaurs to gather as much light as possible in the dark depths of the ocean. Modern deep-diving animals like giant squid have large eyes for the same reason. But no living animal has eyes as large as those of the biggest ichthyosaurs. These animals could see in conditions of near total darkness, hundreds of feet below the surface, in a world of cold and pressure that would crush most modern marine creatures. Ichthyosaurs went extinct approximately 90 million years ago, during the late Cretaceous period, well before the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs. The exact cause of their extinction is debated. Some scientists believe that rising sea levels and changes in ocean chemistry reduced the availability of their preferred prey. Others suggest that competition from newly evolving sharks and marine reptiles played a role. Whatever the cause, ichthyosaurs, animals that had conquered the oceans for over 160 million years, that had evolved eyes the size of dinner plates to see in the abyss, that had converged on the same body plan as dolphins despite being separated by hundreds of millions of years of evolution, simply vanished. The ocean that had been their kingdom moved on without them. Let us now turn to one of the strangest and most philosophically troubling ideas in the field of extinction, the concept of the living dead. In conservation biology, there is a term called functionally extinct. A species is considered functionally extinct when its population has declined to such a low number that it can no longer play its ecological role and has no realistic chance of recovering. The species still exists, individuals are still alive, but it is, for all practical purposes, already gone. Its extinction has not yet been formalized, but it is inevitable. The most famous recent example of functional extinction was the Spix's macaw, a beautiful blue parrot native to a small region of Brazil. The last known wild Spix's macaw disappeared in 2000, a lone male that had been observed for years in the scrublands of Bahia state. He was seen flying alone, calling out for a mate that never came, until one day he simply was not there anymore. The species was declared extinct in the wild in 2000. A small captive population survived in breeding programs, and in 2022, a handful of captive bred Spix's macaws were released back into the wild. Whether this reintroduction will succeed remains to be seen. The species hovers on the boundary between existence and oblivion, neither fully alive nor fully dead, a ghost species haunting the edges of the living world. Here is the unsettling fact about functional extinction. Scientists estimate that hundreds, perhaps thousands, of species alive today are functionally extinct. They still exist in small, fragmented populations, a few dozen here, a few hundred there, but they have fallen below the threshold of viability. They are in the extinction vortex, and without extraordinary intervention, their disappearance is only a matter of time. We are surrounded by living ghosts, species that walk, swim, and fly among us, but whose fates are already sealed. The extinctions of the future are being determined right now in this moment by the conditions we are creating today. Let us now talk about an animal that connects the story of extinction to the story of human culture and memory in a profound way. The aurochs was the wild ancestor of all modern domestic cattle. It was a massive animal. Bulls could stand over 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weigh over 2,200 pounds. It had long, curved horns that could span over 30 inches and a muscular, powerful body built for survival in the forests and grasslands of Europe, Asia, and North Africa. The aurochs was one of the most significant animals in human history. It was hunted by our ancestors for tens of thousands of years. It appears in some of the oldest known works of art. The Paleolithic cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira, created over 17,000 years ago, feature vivid, dynamic depictions of aurochs that still take the breath away. The aurochs was domesticated approximately 10,000 years ago, giving rise to the hundreds of breeds of domestic cattle that exist today. But while the domesticated descendants thrived, the wild aurochs declined. As agriculture spread across Europe and Asia, the aurochs lost habitat. It was also hunted for sport by European nobility, who regarded aurochs hunting as a test of courage and skill. By the Middle Ages, the aurochs was restricted to a few isolated populations in Eastern Europe. The last known aurochs, a female, died in the Jaktoro forest in Poland in 1627. With her death, the wild ancestor of one of the most economically important animals in human civilization was gone. We still have its descendants. Every cow in the world carries aurochs DNA, but the wild original, the massive horned beast that inspired ancient artists and challenged ancient hunters, is extinct. We domesticated it, bred it, reshaped it to suit our needs, and then let the original disappear. There is something deeply unsettling about that, about keeping the copy and losing the original. Here is the additional fact that adds complexity to the auroch story. In recent decades, several projects have attempted to breed back the aurochs by selectively crossing cattle breeds that retain the most aurochs-like traits: large size, specific horn shapes, particular coloring. These projects, including the Heck cattle program begun in the 1920s and the more recent Toros program, have produced animals that visually resemble the aurochs. But as with the Quagga back breeding project, the question remains, is an animal that looks like an aurochs actually an aurochs? Can you recreate a species by reassembling its physical traits from its domesticated descendants? Or is the wild aurochs, with its specific behaviors, its specific genetics, its specific place in the ecosystem, truly and irreversibly gone? These questions do not have easy answers, and they will become increasingly important as do extinction technologies advance. Now, let us explore the deep time of the oceans once more and encounter one of the most mysterious creatures in the fossil record, Opabinia. This was a small marine animal, about 3 inches long, that lived approximately 505 million years ago during the Cambrian period. It was discovered in the Burgess Shale, the same extraordinary fossil deposit that yielded Hallucigenia and Anomalocaris. And like those creatures, Opabinia was breathtakingly strange. Opabinia had 5 eyes, not 2, not 4, but 5, arranged on its head, giving it a panoramic field of vision. From the front of its head extended a long, flexible trunk like proboscis that ended in a claw-like grasping organ, which it presumably used to capture prey on the seafloor and pass it back to its mouth, which faced backward underneath its head. Its body was segmented with lateral lobes for swimming, and it had a broad, fan-shaped tail. When paleontologist Harry Whittington presented his reconstruction of Opabinia at a scientific conference in 1972, the audience burst into laughter. Not because his work was poor, but because the animal looked so absurd, so alien, so far beyond what anyone expected a real animal to look like, that laughter was the only response. A five-eyed creature with a backward-facing mouth and a flexible, clawed trunk on its face seemed more like a surrealist painting than a biological organism. Here's the profound fact about Opabinia. Despite its bizarre appearance, it was a real living animal that existed on this planet for millions of years. It swam, it fed, it reproduced, it survived. Its 5 eyes were not a defect or an anomaly, they were an adaptation, finely tuned by natural selection to help Opabinia detect predators and prey in the murky Cambrian seas. Its backward-facing mouth and grasping proboscis were not design flaws, they were a feeding strategy that worked well enough to sustain the species for eons. Opabinia challenges our assumptions about what an animal should look like. It reminds us that evolution does not follow a plan. It does not aim for elegance or simplicity. It produces whatever works, regardless of how bizarre the result may appear to creatures like us, looking back across 500 million years. Let us now consider the emotional dimension of extinction, something that is rarely discussed in scientific contexts, but that matters profoundly. When we talk about extinct species, we tend to focus on numbers, dates, and causes. We speak of populations and genetic diversity, of habitat loss and overhunting. These are important, but they leave out something essential, the lived experience of the last individuals. Consider the endling, the term used for the last known individual of a species. Martha, the last passenger pigeon. Benjamin, or whoever the last Thylacine truly was. Incas, the last Carolina parakeet. Celia, the last Pyrenean ibex. Lonesome George, the last Pinta Island tortoise, who died on June 24, 2012, despite decades of efforts to find him a mate. These animals did not know they were the last. They could not comprehend the significance of their own existence. They simply lived, ate, slept, breathed, while the weight of their entire species' history rested on their shoulders without their knowledge or consent. Here is the fact that should give every person pause. Lonesome George, the last Pinta Island tortoise, spent decades in captivity as scientists searched the world for a female of his subspecies. They never found one. George lived for years with females of closely related subspecies, but he never successfully bred. When he died, a lineage that had endured for millions of years ended in a research station on the Galapagos Islands. His keepers found him in the morning, stretched out in his enclosure, motionless. He had died during the night, alone, the last of his kind. There is something about the endling that cuts deeper than statistics ever can. It is the loneliness of it, the absolute, irreversible aloneness of being the last. No mate to find, no young to raise, no future, just existence and then nothing. The endling is not just a biological event, it is a moral event. It is the moment when the natural world suffers a loss that can never be undone, and we, the species most responsible for these losses, are forced to confront what we have allowed to happen. Let us now examine one final ancient mystery, one that ties together many of the themes we have explored throughout this documentary. The Cambrian explosion, approximately 540 million years ago, was the most dramatic diversification of life in Earth's history. In a span of roughly 20 to 25 million years, a geological eye blink, virtually all major animal body plans that exist today appeared in the fossil record. Arthropods, mollusks, chordates, echinoderms, annelids, the ancestors of insects, shellfish, fish, starfish, and worms all emerged during this brief, explosive period. But before the Cambrian explosion, there was something else, the Ediacaran biota, which we discussed earlier. And between the Ediacaran and the Cambrian, something happened. The Ediacaran organisms, those strange, quilted, frond-like creatures that had dominated the seafloor for millions of years, disappeared. and in their place a radically different world emerged. The Cambrian world was one of predators and prey, of shells and teeth and eyes and claws. It was a world of competition, of arms races, of eating and being eaten. The Ediacaran world, by contrast, may have been largely peaceful, a world of passive filter feeders and mat grazers, where predation was rare or absent. Here is the fact that ties this ancient event to the broader story of extinction. Some scientists believe that the Ediacaran organisms were not simply outcompeted by Cambrian animals. They may have been eaten by them. The evolution of the first predators, the first animals capable of actively hunting and consuming other organisms, may have triggered the extinction of the entire Ediacaran biota. If this is true, then the very first mass extinction of complex life on Earth was caused not by an asteroid, not by a volcano, not by climate change, but by the invention of predation. The act of one organism eating another, something we take for granted as a fundamental fact of nature, may have been, when it first evolved, an apocalyptic event that reshaped the entire biosphere. Predation was the original weapon of mass destruction, and in a sense, the story has never changed. From the first Cambrian predator consuming the last Ediacaran filter feeder to the last hunter shooting the last great auk, the fundamental dynamic is the same. One organism consuming another, one way of life displacing another, the new world rising on the bones of the old. We have traveled together through 4.5 billion years of history. We have visited every continent and every ocean. We have met animals that dwarfed buildings and animals that fit in the palm of a hand. We have witnessed extinctions caused by asteroids, volcanoes, ice ages, diseases, invasive species, and human greed. We have seen animals driven to extinction by superstition and animals saved from the brink, at least temporarily, by science and compassion. And through it all, one truth has emerged with absolute clarity. Extinction is not an abstract concept. It is not a distant event that happened to other creatures in other eras. It is happening now. It is happening around us. The rate of species extinction today is estimated to be 100 to 1,000 times higher than the natural background rate, the rate at which species go extinct under normal conditions, without human influence. Some scientists have called this the sixth mass extinction, placing it alongside the 5 great extinction events of the geological past: the Ordovician, the Devonian, the Permian, the Triassic, and the Cretaceous. If that comparison holds, then we are living through a catastrophe on the same scale as the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. The difference is that this time the asteroid is us, but here is the fact that offers a sliver of hope in the darkness. Unlike asteroids and volcanic eruptions, we can choose. The forces that drove the Megalodon to extinction, that caused the great dying, that triggered the ice ages, those were beyond the control of any living thing. They were impersonal, indifferent forces of nature. But the forces driving extinction today, habitat destruction, pollution, overexploitation, climate change, invasive species, are all consequences of human choices. And choices can be changed. We have already proven that conservation works. The bald eagle, the gray whale, the Arabian oryx, the California condor, the black-footed ferret, all were brought to the very edge of extinction and pulled back through dedicated, determined human effort. Species can be saved. Habitats can be restored. The extinction vortex can be interrupted, but only if we choose to act, only if we decide that the living world is worth more than the short-term profits that come from destroying it. Every extinct animal we have discussed in this documentary was once alive. Every one of them was a product of millions of years of evolution, shaped by natural selection into a unique and irreplaceable form of life. Every one of them had a role to play in the ecosystems that sustained them. And every one of them is gone forever. We cannot bring back the dodo. We cannot unshoot the last great auk. We cannot undo the drowning of the bramble chemelames or the strangling of the last Thylacine's kind. Those losses are permanent. They are wounds in the fabric of life that will never fully heal. But we can prevent the next loss. We can protect the species that still survive. We can preserve the habitats that sustain them. We can reduce the pollution that poisons them and the emissions that are changing their climate. We can choose as a species to be something more than an extinction force. We can choose to be stewards, guardians, caretakers of a planet that has produced wonders beyond imagination, wonders that once lost can never be recreated. The animals we have met in this documentary are gone. Their stories are finished, but ours is not. The choices we make in the coming years and decades will determine which species join the dodo and the passenger pigeon in oblivion, and which survive to grace this planet for generations to come. The question is not whether we have the power to prevent extinction. We do. The question is whether we have the will. Every species that disappears takes with it a unique thread of the tapestry of life, a thread that was woven over millions of years and that can never be rewoven. When the thread is pulled, the tapestry frays. Pull enough threads and the whole fabric unravels. We do not know how many threads can be lost before the tapestry collapses. We do not know where the tipping point lies, but we know it exists, and we know that with every extinction we move closer to it. The animals of the past cannot speak for themselves. They left behind only bones and shells and footprints pressed into ancient stone. But if they could speak, what would they say? Perhaps they would say what every lost thing says if it could. Remember me. Remember that I was here. Remember that I mattered. Remember that the world was richer for my presence and poorer for my absence. Remember me. The earth remembers. In every fossil, in every fragment of bone, in every trace of ancient DNA locked in permafrost, the earth remembers its lost children. The question is whether we will remember too. Whether we will carry the lessons of extinction forward into a future where they might do some good. Whether we will look at the empty spaces in the natural world, the places where the Thylacine once prowled, the skies where the passenger pigeon once flew, the rivers where the Baiji once swam, and resolve that no more spaces will be emptied on our watch. This is not just a story about animals. It is a story about us, about what we value, what we protect, and what we allow to be destroyed. It is a story about the kind of world we want to live in and the kind of world we want to leave behind. Every species we save is a statement about our character. Every species we lose is a judgment on our priorities. The 100 facts you have heard in this documentary are not just facts. They are warnings, they are lessons, they are eulogies for creatures that deserved better. And they are, if we choose to hear them, a call to action. The dodo did not choose to go extinct. The passenger pigeon did not choose to go extinct. The golden toad did not choose to go extinct. These animals were victims of forces they could not understand, could not control, and could not escape. But we are not victims. We are the force. We are the asteroid, the volcano, the ice age. And unlike those blind, impersonal forces, we have the capacity to stop, to think, to change course. The history of extinction is long and dark, but it does not have to define our future. The animals that still share this planet with us, the elephants, the tigers, the whales, the coral reefs teeming with fish, the rainforests singing with birds, they are still here. They are still fighting to survive, and they need us to fight with them. This documentary has been about loss. Let us make the future about preservation. Let us make it about life. The extinct animals are watching us from the silence of deep time. Let us not add more names to their ranks. Let us for once choose differently.